mind, why are you blowing up the world?
Why shouldn't I?
Because it's rude.
Look, okay, if I want to blow up the world, then I'm going to blow it up, okay? What's up with you?
Submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society.
Oh, joy!
Let's rock.
It makes me want to fart.
Dear Journal, it's me, Doug.
You have it!
Dig it.
Baby's got to do what a baby's got to do.
That was a hoot!
On your mark. Get set.
Oh, here it goes!
Welcome to Splat Attack, where we're taking it back to the slime-filled past. I'm your secret agent co-host, Brett.
And I am your super spy co-host, Alex. And Brett, I'm so excited about this.
Oh, really? Why is that?
We get to talk about one of my absolute favorite things ever.
Ever?
Ever.
Awesome.
I don't think Brett has ever really seen me go super chaotic and super crazy, but I'm actually trying to tone it down, and I'm teetering on failing.
It's okay. I feel the same way about Power Rangers and Legends of the Hidden Temple, so we're
and I love all of those things, but ever since, and I've talked about this a few times before, whenever I discovered the James Bond movies as a teenager, that just became my absolute favorite, and it has not stopped. It is my number one favorite fandom, anything. So, and what we want to talk about, or what I want to talk about, is the impact that James Bond had on pop culture in the 90s. Let me take a look at what we got here, because James Bond is one of those classic movie franchises. It has stood the test of time since the 60s and is still going strong, if not stronger. But we're not talking about the 60s or anything in between. We're talking about the 90s. And the 90s were a very interesting time for the history of James Bond. And whether you realize it or not, Bond had a huge impact on pop culture in the 90s, because there are things that Brett has seen, I have seen, and I'm quite certain that you, the audience, has seen, that has had James Bond references, and you probably didn't even know they were James Bond references. So that's what we want to talk about today, is we're going to mention the impact that Bond had on pop culture.
Yeah, and surprisingly, there are a few 90s Nickelodeon connections, so it's still relevant.
Oh yeah, there's quite a few, so that's really exciting.
Yeah.
So before we go into this, because I'm trying to tone myself down, because there's going to be a ton of stuff to cover in a fairly short amount of time to do it. So before I go into my memories and give you some of my backstory, Brett, what are some of your memories of James Bond when you were a kid?
Whew. Well, I'm sad to say that I don't have much in the old memory vault, but I do have a few scattered here and there. Most of it was kind of like in my peripheral vision. I didn't really like seek out the videos or movies or anything like that, but I did notice them in some 90s Nick shows that we will mention later, and I won't spoil just yet. But probably one of the earliest memories I have is seeing like the world, Tomorrow Never Dies and The World Is Not Enough, because my father is like in some sort of movie kick around the mid 90s. They like wanted to see really, really action packed, or, you know, man oriented films, for lack of a better word or term. And I thought it was pretty cool seeing all the different gadgets and just seeing how suave he was with the ladies, and, you know, just being up all these interesting looking bad guys that had unusual names. And I didn't really scratch the surface any deeper than that experience. I've seen a few others like Casino Royale in the 2000s, and bits of like the Sean Connery and I think Roger Moore videos, movies. Yes. So, you know, it's kind of like surface level appreciation, but I do enjoy like the aesthetics and the tropes that come with it. And I'm sure you can school me on why it's amazing, as well as the rest of our slimesters and gackoids who may not be so privy to James Bond culture.
Well, like I said, there's a ton of pop culture references that have gone through the 90s, and it's not just 90s, it's almost been from its inception. But it was really interesting because as a kid, none of my family were into the franchise. So I had to experience all of this on my own. I do recall that there was one afternoon when I was a kid, I had just finished watching a movie on ye old VHS tape. And when I stopped the tape, whatever the channel was on at the time, there was this movie that was playing, and it was a man being shoved into what looked like a conference room. And when he entered, there was this woman who yelled, "James!" and she rushed to his embrace. And their reunion was quickly met with the impending doom of being eviscerated. And they heard this droning voice from above, from where the ceiling should be. There was a giant hole with a rocket right above them. And this George Lucas looking villain, just very monotone and going to destroy the super spy. And before the shuttle took off, this male character rushed over to an air vent that is as tall as he is and used his watch to attach a bomb, like a little plastic explosive, and blew the door open, and they were able to escape through this hatch. And I thought this was really cool. I'd like to watch more, but back in this time period, for anyone who grew up in the 90s knows, there was no on demand, there was no TV, there was no guide on the television when you turned it on. You had to go find the TV guide and flip through it to find what this is. And when it went to a commercial break, it didn't say what the movie was. I didn't know what the TV guide was. So I just went, okay, well, if I find it again, I'll find it again. And I left it at that. A couple of years later, I started losing interest in kids programming. Nickelodeon was shifting priorities again. Cartoon Network's humor wasn't quite catching me the way that it used to. Saturday morning cartoons had lost their luster with me. I wanted something more mature. So I sat by my Christmas tree on one winter's evening, and my parents were gone. I was flipping through the channels and stumbled upon this scene with the same actor from the movie I had referenced earlier, only this time Christopher Walken was having a sparring session with Grace Jones. Now, I knew who these two actors were, and the man who I didn't know who it was, which was James, was running around what seemed like this castle and was trying to get to his room before Grace Jones and Christopher Walken knew that he was missing. And I knew this was the same franchise. I thought it might have been a sequel directly from the one I saw before. So I waited. And this time the bumper came up with Grace Jones on the bumper, stating that the audience was watching 15 Days of 007.
This December on the Superstation, Bond is taking to the air with 15 Days of 007.
It may get a bit bumpy. You might want to fasten your seatbelts.
Today, live and let die. Then,
double jeopardy, Mr. Bond.
Diamonds are forever, and Octopussy. 15 Days of 007, beginning at 10:35 Eastern.
Exclusively on the Superstation.
And the logo of 007 caught my interest because I rushed to my bedroom and got a comic book that I got from the library. And there was a full page ad in the comic book of 15 Days of 007. And it had listed all the movies that they were going to be playing. So quickly I got the TV guide and, okay, is this still going on? How long is this going on? It's going on for 2 weeks. No, it's going on for 3 weeks. It's going all through December. Okay, and I went and got all my VHS tapes and started programming the VCR to record all these different movies because I wanted to watch them. And the first movie I saw happened to be the movie that I had referenced earlier that I didn't know that's what this was, which was Moonraker. And the second one, because they did a double feature right after that, was The Man with the Golden Gun. And I absolutely fell in love with this franchise from those two movies. And I will openly admit, if you've not seen these movies, James Bond fans will tell you these are two of the worst entries in the entire franchise.
Really?
They are cheesy. They are not well written. But I fell in love with them at its worst. And it only got better from there. And I became an avid, diehard James Bond fan from then out. I had to get everything. I had to get all the merchandise. I had to find all the movies. I had to get the books, the soundtracks, anything I could get my hands on. I began to study the franchise. In junior high, I even got together with some friends and did 2 home movies of James Bond Jr. And we did a movie called A Kiss to Die For and Deadly Desire. So I loved, still do to this day. It's been 24 years since I first found the James Bond movies, and it has only increased in my affection for it with every single year. And my wife will tell you, I am absurd when the next movie comes out because I am relentless with my anticipation. So it is with extreme pleasure that I get to share all this information with you Slimesters and Gakoids, because I want you all to be able to appreciate the franchise in the 90s nostalgia that we all have. So before we can really go into really appreciating the pop culture, we need to have some very, very basic history of where the James Bond franchise was at the 90s. So before we go into that, I'm gonna quiz Brett just to see what he knows. I know you're not gonna know the history of it, but when it comes to the basic James Bond formula in a movie, what do you usually think
of? Pretty girls, usually someone to be rescued. I think it's like M or Q or some letter like technology expert that's at the secret headquarters that describes the different gadgets for Bond to use. I guess there's a different Bond every couple of movies or so for some reason. They have very interesting titles, usually like one word or like a tongue-in-cheek sentence. There's usually like a daring getaway with tons of action, maybe some explosives too. The tuxedo, of course, gotta have that. I mean, I'm pretty sure James Bond isn't walking around in a Hawaiian shirt, kind of like Miami Vice.
He does.
Really?
He does. In the movie Die Another Day, he does walk around in a Hawaiian shirt.
Wow. Okay. Well, I stand corrected.
But most of the time, you are correct. And at that time, he was not a secret agent. At that
was he on vacation?
No, he quit.
Oh.
So
that's how you know he moved to Florida.
Yes.
Or what else am I missing?
You're right. Everything you had touched on is right. There is an M and there is a Q. Q is the one who gave all the technological gadgets and weaponry and things like that. Q was for quartermaster.
Okay.
M is his boss. And the basic formula every movie was there was a pre-title sequence, which I think was the first film franchise to ever do this, where they had a little scene before the credits. And usually it was an action scene that was completely unrelated to the movie. And then you'd have the title sequence, and then it would go into the plot where the villain would do something, and then M would call in James. This is our situation. I need you to go take care of it. He would go to Q, get his gadgets, and then he would fly off to some beautiful locale in the world, and he would meet with whoever the agent was that he was going to meet with, that almost always got killed unless it was Felix Leiter, or he'd meet his beautiful Bond girl, and then they'd go off into incredible adventures and death-defying stunts. James Bond always got caught and always found a way to get out of the situation with some ridiculous fancy. And then huge explosion, Bond saves the day. And that's pretty much your basic formula. It's evolved over time. But as for the history, and it's a long history, but I promise I'm going to abbreviate this really short. I promise. But Bond actually started as a book series from Ian Fleming, and he started with the book Casino Royale and this is in 1953. He wrote a total of 14 novels of the British spy. He felt that the series would make a great film franchise, so he went to different movie producers, and every one of them turned him down, except for Harry Saltzman and Cubby Broccoli, where they made the production company Everything or Nothing, or Eon, as they're often called. Now, if there are any other diehard James Bond fans out there who happen to hear this, there was a third, but that is a whole nother story that I could do a whole episode on, and I'm not going to because it's not 90s. But there was a third, and that guy is out of the picture, so it was just the two of them. But the producers started trying to find the right actor, and they went to a bunch of big name actors at the time, and every single one of them turned them down. They wanted this to be a franchise where they were going to do 3 or 4 movies in a row, and one guy said, no, I'll do 1, I won't do 2, I'll do 2, I won't do 3. So then they went to Sean Connery, who at the time wasn't really big in movies. He had been in a couple, but he wasn't a big name. It was actually the Disney movie Darby O'Gill and the Little People that got him the role of James Bond.
I've never heard of that.
It's a really interesting movie about leprechauns. Now Sean Connery very, very much defined the role of James Bond with his first movie, Dr. No, and it was a moderate success.
That's my background.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Right. Sorry, I'm having pointing issues.
Actually, and that actually is not James Bond, or not Sean Connery. That's actually Maurice Bender who did the opening title sequences. But they eventually got Sean Connery to do it. But the first film was a moderate success. It wasn't huge, but it was a success enough for them to do a part 2, which doubled their gross. So then, of course, they had to do a third. And holy crap, the third movie, Goldfinger, that was gigantic. This was back in '64. In the 60s are often described as Bond, Beatles, and Batman. Because the Batman TV series was huge. The Beatles obviously were huge, and James Bond was huge. They had cologne, they had shorts, they had board games, they had toys. And at the time, multiplexes weren't really a thing. So whenever they had to do a movie, they only did it in one cinema that could only play one movie. And people had to wait outside, and there were actual riots over this movie because people didn't want to wait to get in to see it.
Wow.
So this gives you an idea of how much of an impact James Bond had on pop culture in the 60s. By this point, Sean Connery started losing interest because he started to feel like he was being typecast. So he did 2 more and then said, no, I'm not doing any more. Now, to address your why there was somebody else, it's the same character, but the producers they were going to keep doing James Bond movies, but how are we going to do this without Sean Connery? He has been Bond. Can we start all new? Should we start all new? Can we get a new actor but play the same character? Because at the time, nobody really did that. I mean, you had movies like Sherlock Holmes and Dracula and Tarzan where they had same character, different actor, but there was really no continuity.
Yeah.
This was the first movie that I'm aware of in mainstream media where it was the entire supporting cast was exactly the same. And they hit notes and beats that James Bond had been on the previous adventures of the previous 5 movies. So this was very much the same character. And they went with Australian model George Lazenby. And at the time, audiences didn't really know what to think. It had a downer ending, and they didn't really like George Lazenby, and some people still don't. But it turned out
he act at all?
He not really.
Okay, so he's just
Not
a pretty
really.
face in a suit then.
Very much. There are some things he was really good at. There were quite a few that he really wasn't, but I do really like him. But the movie was still a pretty big success And it was the first movie franchise to really prove we can continue the series with a different actor and the same character.
Yeah, and it actually makes me think of the Batman series, which I'm really into, because as you've noticed throughout time, they just change the Batman and sometimes even the Robin too, and the villains, and it doesn't matter as long as you followed like the same, outline structure, whatever you have that everyone buys into.
Exactly.
And it's nice that it works out like that, because the franchises can just repeat endlessly if they really wanted to, as long as they keep bringing in money at the box office.
Absolutely. And because the biggest complaint that people had about this movie was it wasn't Sean Connery. So they begged Connery to come back, and and he did with a ridiculous amount. He was the highest paid actor at the time because of this movie, which was Diamonds Are Forever. And he didn't keep any of that movie. He didn't keep any of that money. All of it he donated to schools in Scotland.
Oh, that's a good cause then.
So after that movie, it's time to move on to the next, and now we're in the 70s, and that's where Roger Moore came into play. And he also wasn't a well-known actor at the time. He was on the TV show The Saint in England, but that's where he was most known. The rest of the world didn't really know who he was. And he set the tone, which was really comedic, for James Bond through the 70s and early 80s. And he was in 7 James Bond movies. Sean Connery was in 6, 7 if you count the unofficial Bond movie, but that's another story. You go to the 80s, and you've got Timothy Dalton. At the time, he was really known for doing a lot of Shakespeare, especially Shakespearean plays, and he's very much a thespian. Every role he took was very dramatic. He's not really an action star.
He's more theatrical sounding.
Yes, very much. But this was the James Bond of the 80s, and this is also a time when the biggest draws to action movies were things like Lethal Weapon. So one of the things that James Bond movies always did was they took what's popular in pop culture now and found a way to twist it into the franchise, so that way every movie would keep with the current times. So Bond was always adapting.
That's very clever.
So for this movie, which was License to Kill, they really went with the drug bust thing. For like they did in Lethal Weapon, and really took a lot of the 80s action movie tropes and put it in James Bond. So it felt less like a James Bond spy and more like a James Bond action. And it was the first PG-13 movie that Bond had at that time. Up to this point, it's only been PG. And it was one of the most violent, if not still possibly one of the most violent James Bond movies. And
I mean, with a title like that, I mean, you kind of have to live up to the name.
yes, you really, really do. And to give you an idea, because this movie was dogged at the time. Bond quit his job because his longtime friend Felix Leiter, who had been in previous Bond movies up to this point, I think he was one of the only recurring agent that kept showing up. The beginning of the movie, he got married, and then after the title sequence, his wife was raped and murdered, and then Felix Leiter was mauled by a shark. And then James Bond goes to tell his boss, I need to go get the guy who did this. And his boss said, nope, that has nothing to do with us. So James Bond quits and goes on a revenge story to the man who did his friend this way. It's very, very dark. And audiences did not know what to think of this movie. And this is 1989.
Yeah.
So fans were like, this is not James Bond. And what audiences didn't know was they had planned 2 more James Bond movies with Timothy Dalton, but then the company who made the Bond movies was starting to go bankrupt, and they started going into partner dealerships or partner deals with other movie companies, and there was a lot of legal dispute. So we didn't get a James Bond movie for a very long time. up to this point, they had James Bond movies coming out every 2 years, which is an incredible feat.
Yeah. Considering how much like manpower is required to just produce a film, especially back then, you were lucky if you got a film every like 2-3 years from the same production company.
I mean, movies today, like Marvel, they can churn them out pretty much in about that time, but they use a lot of computer animated effects. Back then, James Bond was all practical and in these super beautiful places, and it cost millions of dollars to make. So the fact that they could make 2 a year or every 2 years was an incredible feat. And
definitely.
And now they're not. It had been 6 years, which was a huge gap. And in any franchise, when there's 6 years in between, especially the 80s and into the 90s, it's death for the movie franchise.
Yeah, sounds like it's in a movie purgatory and like on its last limb to see if it can be saved again or killed forever.
And by today's standards, we've seen movies that have come back. We've seen sequels that have been 20, 30 years after the original.
Yeah, nothing ever dies anymore with all the reboots.
Yeah, exactly. But in the 80s and 90s, this was not a common thing. In fact, it wasn't a thing. So when you have a 6-year time gap, it's done. The franchise is done. And people still thought that James Bond was dead because of the poor reception of License to Kill, but that's not necessarily true. Eventually, they did bring out another one with Pierce Brosnan in '95 called Goldeneye, but we'll talk about that in a bit.
Oh, yes.
But this was where we were, because we 90s kids who were born in the 80s or born in the 90s, this was our point in James Bond history where Bond has had a huge impact in pop culture, and now is, for lack of a better term, the franchise is dead and we don't know anything about it. But the interesting thing is pop culture still loved this franchise and kept putting it in all of their movies, all of their shows, and it's everywhere.
I think that's how it survived. Like with such a long lull, it needed to reference the good old days to help people remember, oh, I mean, don't pay any attention to License to Kill. Here's all this other stuff that can remind you of all these other films like Thunderball, Goldfinger, Octopussy, whatever you can think of, Moonraker. And that, I think it's just like the last hurrah that really pushed it back into livelihood, that kept it going after its revival in the 90s.
Exactly. And that's one of that's where we are in terms of the Bond story. But now that we've gone through all the brief history of it, because I condensed a bunch for you, but now we're just going to go through the pop culture references. And there is a ton of pop culture references. So I've got plenty to talk about. So Brett, if you know any of these, you take it over.
Oh yeah.
But we're just gonna churn them out. Some of these are going to be in the 80s, but there was a lot of replayability in the 90s too for some of these.
Yeah, if there's anything I can comment on, I'll jump in.
So we are just going to go down the list. Starting in 1981, there was the TV show called Danger Mouse. And if there's any early 90s Nickelodeon kids, Danger Mouse replayed a lot on Nickelodeon, especially early in the morning, usually around the same time Mr. Wizard was on.
Yeah, I often saw it like around other late 80s cartoons on Nickelodeon, like Count Duckula and Heathcliff and Inspector Gadget. So that lineup of syndicated shows.
And Danger Mouse took a lot of influence from James Bond. Obviously, it was a British television animated TV series. The car was very much like James Bond. It was laid out with gadgets, and Danger Mouse was very British and very honorable and very much wanted to be the hero. And he had a little bumbling sidekick, which was often James Bond's shtick, where he had one agent who was with him and always got killed in some
comically killed or just killed.
Just killed. So some of the other pop culture
hold on. I really love to see an agent just get hit with an exploding pie in the face just to make it more relevant to Nickelodeon, or slimed like, oh, what kind of gadget you got there, Agent Z? I don't know, slime.
And
oh,
some
that's
of
a shame. You've gone to pieces, apparently.
Oh no! I guess the little key lime pie is too much for you. But yeah, some of the pop culture references we have later very much do play into that kind of a trope where the sidekick is killed comedically. And after Danger Mouse, we also have Inspector Gadget.
Inspector Gadget. Yeah, I that was probably like one of the first cartoons I've ever gotten into. Like, I was an infant at the time, and I just remember like how cool he looked with like his helicopter hat that popped out, and he had like springs in his legs so he can jump high, and like various other gadgets that would come off his gloves, and his jacket would inflate. It definitely felt like it was a goofier version of James Bond, maybe mixed with a little bit of Get Smart from the 60s as well. The thing that really used to creep me out about that show is Dr. Claw, because he had this very deep drawling voice with like a pet cat at his like hellfire like office, and we never got to actually see him in person. We always just saw his like claw sitting on his arm, the arm part of his chair, and he's like, I'll get you next time, gadgets. And that part used to just creep me out as a kid. Like, it was very unnerving, but that's a great cartoon.
Yeah, Inspector Gadget, as in terms of the character, took a lot of inspiration from Inspector Clouseau from the Pink Panther movies. But Claw, who you were just talking about, is absolutely the nemesis of James Bond.
I'll be back, Gadget. You'll pay for this. You'll pay. I'll get you yet.
Blofeld was a villain who kept appearing from Dr. No, the very first movie, and is still, this last movie that came out last year, Blofeld is still in it. But wow, for the longest time, it was exactly what you saw with Dr. Claw. You never saw him. There was always something that would shroud the top half of him, or he would just not be seen on camera, and he always had a white cat in his lap, and it was often zoomed in on the cat, and he would just pet, and oftentimes it was a dark, deep, monotonous voice, until Donald Pleasance played him later, in which case it was really nasal.
Oh boy, I remember him from Puma Man from MST3K.
Yes, yes. Oh, I didn't want to hear that. But yes, for a long time, that was the trope, and that was the trope that they played for Inspector Clouseau, or Inspector Gadget.
Hopefully we'll get to do an episode review of that later when we dive into like late 80s Nicktoons, like some of the others that we have in our schedule.
Yes. There are several times in these pop culture references where they're just references to certain lines. Some of the more iconic James Bond lines is obviously the one that probably most people are familiar with, the way he introduces himself, last name first, followed by first name and then last name, Bond, James Bond. And another one that often gets referenced is the way he prefers his vodka martini, shaken, not stirred.
I know that line, and I've never even heard it in a movie.
Yes. And so that has been referenced a lot of times, including our next entry, the movie Gremlins. Judge Reinhold is one of the actors. I forgot the character he plays, Norbert or something like that. I can't remember the name. Who cares? He's he's a throwaway character. But he goes into a bar and sits down. Waitress comes over and he requests a medium dry vodka martini, shake not stir.
A vodka martini, shake not stir.
So it's slightly different. Instead of shaken not stirred,
does it taste better that way?
Stir. I guess.
I don't know.
I guess to avoid copyright infringement, they slightly different, but that was the whole reference there. In 1984, we had Beverly Hills Cop 2, and there was a scene with Eddie Murphy and Gilbert Gottfried. And the whole time, Eddie Murphy is just trying to get access to Gilbert Gottfried's computer, so he pretended that he had a whole bunch of parking tickets, and Gilbert Gottfried, I didn't know, that's my wife's car.
That's a great impression of Gilbert Gottfried. Loud and annoying.
Thank you. and
talks like this.
yeah, he does. And then he gave, if I gave you this money, maybe you can just forget the little tickets over here. Like, so you're bribing me? Well, if you want to call it that. Well, if I'm going to wipe these tickets out, I need to be able to have access to your computer. Can I have? Oh yeah, sure. And he goes to sit down, and then Eddie Murphy doesn't want him around. So, would you mind stepping away, because I need some privacy. I don't want you looking around. Oh yeah, sure. It's like a James Bond thing. Yeah, sure.
That's great.
So there's your Bond reference for Beverly Hills Cop 2. Goonies has a great reference, which I love this. Data, or Data, however you want to pronounce his name, which was Short Round from Temple of Doom.
Oh, interesting.
He is a huge James Bond fan. When you first meet him in the movie, he's got a belt buckle that says 007 on it. He makes a zip line that goes into the main character's house and goes through the screen door or through a window or something, breaks something when he first comes in, and is obsessed with having booby traps, but he keeps saying it wrong. He calls them booty traps, and everyone corrects him. No, it's booby traps. That's what I said, booty traps.
I mean, either way, it references a part of the body, so it gets the job done.
So he's obsessed, and his booby traps were gadgets, little at-home made gadgets. And at one point, he's talking to some of the other characters while they're riding a bike, and they're annoyed with him because he won't shut up. And one of them calls him 00 negative, and he gets upset that was the name they called him. It's 007, not 00 negative.
Yeah, that sounds like a weird blood type.
Yes, it does. Another reference that we're actually going to see a lot in this list is actually right behind Brett. Every single James Bond movie started with the gun barrel, which would be this little white circle that would go across the screen, and then would expand
like that.
And then it would expand to this gun barrel. James Bond would appear in the middle, and he would shoot at the screen, and this red blood would drop from the screen. Of all places for this reference to appear, I would not expect it to show up in a Friday the 13th movie.
Whoa.
But it does. At the end of part 6, the camera zooms into, I think it's the main protagonist's eye, which then takes the place of the gun barrel. And then Jason walks in, just like James Bond, turns to the screen, and instead of shooting, he uses the machete and swipes across the screen, and then it fades to red, and then it's done. End of the movie.
Wow. It's like James Bond's zombie version.
Exactly. I don't have a whole lot to go off of this one, but Saturday Night Live in the 80s, 1987, had a James Bond reference with the sketch Bullets Ain't Cheap, in which was Steve Martin playing James Bond, and the musical guest of the episode was Sting. Oh, and he played the Bond villain, and he was dressed all in gold.
That sounds cool.
So he was Gold Sting. Even the comics got into it. There have been some, I think DC Comics did a James Bond novel or a comic at one point, and Marvel did a James Bond comic at one point. But in '88, Justice League International had a James Bond cover with Bruce Wayne in a tuxedo doing the usual James Bond pose, which was one arm across the chest, the other arm parallel to his body, perpendicular to the floor, holding up a gun beside his head, with usually accompanied by two beautiful women. And that's exactly the pose that Bruce Wayne was in for the comic. And on the cover, it said, Wayne, Bruce Wayne.
Trying to do double duty as some superheroes, huh?
Yes. Also in '89, this is our last '80s reference of, again, another weird one, the Super Mario Brothers Super Show. And The
It's
movie,
me, James Bond.
yes. Oh man, it gets worse. It gets so much worse.
Oh boy.
You can't make this up. The movie that I told you about earlier, where George Lazenby was in, the Australian model, that movie was called On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
That's the movie title?
That's the movie title.
Okay.
The episode title for this Mario episode was On Her Majesty's Sewer Service.
Oh boy.
The premise for the episode is Princess Toadstool's chief spy, James Blonde, is zapped by King Koopa, and Mario and Luigi have to turn into secret agents to rescue James Blonde.
Wow. I need to see that because that sounds ridiculous.
It's awful. I love it though. I love the Super Mario Brothers Super Show. It's awful and cheesy, but
Isn't that live action or is that animation?
Both.
Oh.
It was two segments.
Okay.
There would be one. It was kind of like a bumper. You'd have your cartoon intro with Captain Lou Albino as Mario, who would be intercut with the animation for the intro, and then they'd have some ridiculous thing where they would end on a cliffhanger, and then it would go to the cartoon portion of the episode, which was its own episode, and then it would end with the climax or the conclusion to the live action portion. So the live action would sandwich the cartoon segments.
Okay, interesting format.
Probably one of our most obscure references. In 1990, there was a Sega Genesis and a PC game about a fish secret agent, and it was called James Pond, Underwater Agent.
Well, I gotta see that.
And I think every level had a James Bond title. Like one of them was A View. One of the movies was called A View to a Kill. And if I remember right, one of the levels was about an oil tanker that had spilled oil into the pond or the ocean, and you had to go clean it all up. And the level was called A View to a Spill.
Yeah, clever puns.
In 1990, we had another reference of Married with Children, and it was the episode You Gotta Know When to Fold Them, in which Al Bundy is in a white tuxedo and presents himself as Bundy. Al Bundy. Quick and easy.
Yep.
Our first full Nickelodeon reference. Yes, we had Danger Mouse and Inspector Gadget, but they weren't Disney. They weren't Nickelodeon originals.
Yeah, they're syndicated.
Hey Dude is our first James Bond reference within Nickelodeon original content, and it was the episode Superstition.
Do you know what season that was?
That was season 3, I believe. This was after Ted had left.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't see any of those with what's his name, Jake, the replacement.
Yeah. And Buddy had found out that there was a local radio or a local game show, and they were holding auditions for people to go be on the show. So he wanted Danny to go be on this show, this trivia game show, because he knows a lot of stuff. And Danny's like, no, I don't. I know a lot of stuff here. I know a lot about nature and things like that. I don't know a lot of stuff about pop culture and things like that. And then Jake shows up, and Buddy was like, tell Danny he needs to do this thing. And he starts asking Danny or Jake questions, and Jake knows all of them. And one of the questions that he asked was, what was James Bond's best friend CIA agent's name?
Jack Lord, best known as Steve McGarrett in TV's Hawaii Five-0, played what character in the James Bond film Dr. No?
Come on, you're kidding, right?
I know, stumped me too. Told you wouldn't get that one.
Felix Leiter, come on, you guys.
It isn't.
It is.
And Danny was like, see, I don't know that. How can he know that? And he got the answer right. He said, it's Felix Leiter. Come on. And Felix Leiter was the guy who got his was mauled on License to Kill.
Right.
So I really appreciated the fact that they pulled a pretty obscure reference that most audiences really wouldn't catch. I thought that was pretty cool.
For all you Bond fans out there who also love 90s Nick.
This is a great, probably one of my favorite references to Dr. No was on Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And this was on the episode Clubba Hubba. And Will had found this beautiful girl, like he does in every episode, and wants to get in good with her, but everyone was telling him, no, you can't. To get to her, you've got to get to her dad. Oh, well, sure, I can get to his dad. Sure, I can charm him. He goes, no, you can't. He's called Dr. No. Why?
Dr. Maybe.
Why? Because he's a doctor? No, because he says no to everyone who tries to get to his daughter. James Pond made another appearance with the sequel game, James Pond 2 RoboCod.
What? Why is it referencing two movies in one game title?
It's so ridiculous.
It must be really desperate for sales.
and the cover was the fish doing the James Bond pose, but in the RoboCop suit.
Oh my gosh. So he's like the RoboCop guy, but in a tux.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. No. He's not in the tux because he was in a tux for the first one. No, this was the James Bond pose just with the RoboCop suit on instead of a tuxedo. In 91, James Bond got his own TV show with a Saturday morning cartoon show with James Bond Jr. And it was his nephew. And they took a lot of the classic James Bond villains and gave them a reworking. So they were like siblings or somehow related to the main villain.
Yeah.
Like Jaws, as an example. Most people, I'm sure, would recognize Jaws when they see him in the James Bond movies. He was played by Richard Kiel. The man is gigantic, 7 foot, probably taller, and he had the metal teeth. And that's it. His teeth were metal. In the cartoon show, it was the whole lower jaw that was metal. So it was some of the tropes, but they had just changed it a little bit.
Seems like similar to like how Looney Tunes had Tiny Toon Adventures as its counterpart, like maintaining the lore, but just aged down some of the characters or made them related to the Looney Tunes at Acme University.
Exactly. And James Bond Jr. was everywhere. It had comic books, it had board games, it had video games, it had its own line of toys, which were a lot like the Dick Tracy toys. So James Bond Jr. they really tried to make it a big thing. It only lasted one season, and most kids don't really remember it. I think it had to compete with something else that was bigger at the time. In 91, Guns N' Roses released a cover of the song Live and Let Die, which a lot of people know now, but it was a Paul McCartney and the Wings song, which was the title song for the movie that was the same name.
Oh, I didn't know the song and the movie were related. I thought they were just separate.
No, they made that song specifically for that movie, and that theme can be heard throughout the entire thing. And then, of course, Guns N' Roses did a really awesome cover of it.
I'll have to listen to that. You two Slimesters and Gackoids.
Yes. Ren and Stimpy. Do you wish to share the Ren and Stimpy one?
I mean, there's not much to share about it. It's a secret agent Log, and he's got like a little tuxedo and a martini attached to him, and you can just pretend that he goes on exciting spy adventures in the forest with woodpeckers or beavers, or use your imagination. It's from Ren and Stimpy.
I had completely forgotten that they did Secret Agent Log, because again, this came out when I was a kid and I didn't know James Bond at the time. I remembered Log. I remember that commercial. I had completely forgot they had different iterations of Log.
Yeah, there's some where they like dressed up in different outfits, kind of like how you dress dolls or action figures.
And get set for super secret spy action with Agent 00 Log.
And they did the gun barrel reference. They had the gun barrel, and Log slowly came into the gun barrel and did, I think they even did the blood thing. I don't remember.
Yeah, it was great.
Nickelodeon's Doug.
How can we forget that? I mean, Smash Adams, get out of here. It has even has like a really cool theme song that's tied into it. Doug Funny. Oh, what a guy who's made of cool, but he's still in school.
I love it. And they actually had another reference. I mean, Doug is in a white tuxedo, which we've seen Bond do a few times, and he does the James Bond pose. And Pork Chop also is in a tuxedo. But it was also one of the first TV shows that I can think of where they made a nod to the song sequence, the credit sequence, because they always had the credits, but they always had this background that was usually in one particular color with a few different hues, and the main focus was usually a silhouette of some kind. Usually was a girl. Sometimes James Bond would come in, but Doug did that because it did the gun barrel and made this red and hot pink background, and then Doug and Pork Chop go into full silhouette in front of the background.
There was no turning back.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome to see, especially if you're a Doug fan. I believe the Smash Adams character, because he's like one of Doug's, like, I guess, alter egos in his mind, like Quailman and Race Canyon and Jack Bandit are. He appears in a few episodes. I don't remember most of them. I know that he makes a brief cameo in Doug's Halloween Adventure and also in Doug's Dental Disaster, which we see, Smash Adams and Doug himself go up against Dr. Decay in his dental dungeon of doom. So that's pretty cool.
I think the first one he appeared in was Doug's Doodle.
Yes.
He had drawn a picture of Miss Wingo and he was trying to find a way to break in, which was where the incarnation of Smash Adams came in.
Very cool.
92, we had Wayne's World, which there was an episode, or not an episode, there was a scene where Wayne opens up this door in the cafe, and there's this room of just a bunch of people dressed in these black suits, and they were jumping and kicking. They were almost like ninjas, and they were throwing weapons, and there were flamethrowers. And Garth comes up beside Wayne and is like, what is this? And Wayne goes, oh, nothing. I just always wanted to open a door where there was a bunch of people trading like they were in a James Bond movie.
Like a band of minions or something at the gym.
Because there is, this is a reference, not just the James Bond line, but in the movie From Russia with Love, this was how the villains trained. There was what they called the gauntlet, where they had an area where they were doing ninja stars, and they had an area where there was somebody using a flamethrower with an actual person trying to avoid getting hit by the flamethrower.
Oh wow.
And it would just go down the line of this specter, because that's what they were called, agents training themselves. And that's exactly the reference that they put in Wayne's World. And it does not surprise me that this reference is in Wayne's World, because Mike Myers goes on to do another huge James Bond reference that we're going to get to later.
Oh yes, and I remember seeing that more than any of the other references aside from the Doug one growing up in the 90s. So that's where a lot of the lore kind of draws into my life.
We have another James Pond game.
Oh my goodness.
This was James Pond 3, Operation Starfish. In this one, there's hardly any James Bond references in the game. Not at all like the first one. It's kind of a terrible game.
I feel like I need to like play all three of these just one weekend and see if it holds any water.
But no.
Yeah, I'm full of them.
No, they're not very good. Just for the what's the novelty of having them.
Right.
Clarissa Explains It All has a James Bond reference within it. Do you remember this one?
I remember the episode very vaguely because I only caught Clarissa like here and there on Snick as a kid, and because Paramount never released any of the DVD seasons beyond season 1, shame on them from 2005.
Yes.
I never really got to see it until Paramount Plus became a thing. So this is the episode when Marshall's parents come to visit, and they're, you know, like they're typical grandparents, and Clarissa imagines them like what their life is like when they're not like visiting. And one of the scenarios is that they could be secret agents. And I just remember them like going through all these crazy like maneuvers and ended up like both hanging from parachutes, flying down with like a bag of money, and then kissing each other or something to that extent.
Or will they become international spies, foiling plots for global domination?
It was like a really quick nod to it, but it was nice.
Yeah. They were seen as being complete boring. Just, oh man, they're coming over. I don't want to hang out with them. They're boring. And then they come to find out that they're really quite adventurous, and they're tired of living the boring life. They don't want to be the same way that their friends are. So they're going out doing more things, which really sparks Clarissa's interest. And then she imagines them as Indiana Jones. And then she imagines them as James Bond, as you said, parachuting down. He's in a tuxedo, she's in a dress, and there's a plane behind them that's crashing, and they both have martini glasses in their hands as they're parachuting down, and they cheers.
I find it interesting how like Indiana Jones is kind of wedging itself into this episode, because there's also Race Canyon, which is Indiana Jones based from Doug as his alter ego, and then Temple of Doom from before in Short Rounds.
Well, also, and if you're going to go that route,
and Sean Connery, Last Crusade, right?
Last Crusade. When they made Indiana Jones, it is very, very much a reference to old 50s B adventure movies, adventure serials. But one of the inspirations for the character Indiana Jones was also James Bond. And Steven Spielberg had said that. And then whenever they were going to cast Indiana Jones' dad, he said, if anybody is going to be Indiana Jones' dad, it has to be James Bond.
Who better?
So moving on to Rugrats.
Yeah, we're hitting the Nicktoons Trinity here when they first come out on Nickelodeon. This is from an episode called Kid TV, which I believe is from season 2. And it features
Angelica Bond, Master Spy.
Stop! This is way too boring!
You know, basically the whole premise of the episode is that Stu ends up breaking his big screen TV in the family's house with like his Transformer invention, because he sees a better version of it being marketed on a commercial, and he just kind of throws in frustration. And then the kids like take a hold of the box that he can't fit on the TV to return the TV to the manufacturer. And so they start playing pretend with it by cutting a hole out, kind of like the Roundhouse TV style, except with like 4 sides in the back. And they each come up with their own television show or like channel or something to that extent for the other babies to watch. And one of them that they come up with is Angelica Bond, Master Spy. And it really isn't much of anything. It's just essentially Angelica moving around with the gun barrel following her. And she's like doing backflips and somersaults and tripping on herself and looking really cool next to her sports car. And that's about it. But I still like the nod nonetheless. It's quite hilarious. And it's one of my favorite all-time Rugrats episodes.
Yeah, and then Phil changes the quote unquote channel on Angelica, proclaiming boring.
Yeah, and then they also offer the convertible as like a prize on Tommy's game show channel, where he's like, oh yeah, you can win a brand new car. And she's like, hey, that's mine.
There is a James Bond reference in the movie Mrs. Doubtfire. Near the beginning, when Robin Williams is looking for a job and goes to that, I forgot her name, but Mrs. Selner, I think is how you pronounce her name.
Yeah.
He had said, oh, I do voices, and then goes through this litany of different voices and impersonations. And at one point, one of the recurring characters in the James Bond franchise is M's secretary called Moneypenny.
Mm-hmm.
And Robin Williams does an impression of Sean Connery talking to Moneypenny. And there's no way I could do an impression of Robin Williams doing an impression of Sean Connery, but it's a classic.
Look at me right now, Moneypenny. I want to undo that bow and get to know you.
Speaking of Mrs. Doubtfire, it's really funny because there's actually another Bond reference kind of tucked away in here. If you notice, Sally Field's character, who's like Robin Williams's wife in the movie, is none other than the charming Pierce Brosnan, who plays Bond in the 90s film. And those are the Bond films that I saw growing up, like Tomorrow Never Dies, World Is Not Enough, Goldeneye, stuff like that. And it's really interesting to see him here before he like got big into the Bond films, because you can tell he definitely oozed charisma and charm and like his very well-dressed demeanor.
I don't know if I have it anymore. I had recorded on an old VHS tape there was a TV special on the movie Goldeneye that was coming up, and they had interviewed Robin Williams asking about how he thought Pierce Brosnan was going to be as James Bond, since he worked together on Mrs. Doubtfire. So Robin Williams, doing the Mrs. Doubtfire voice, was talking about how wonderful Pierce Brosnan is going to be as James Bond, because he's absolutely beautiful. There's nothing wrong the man can do. Something to that effect.
Except choke on dinner, which Robin Williams as Mrs. Doubtfire saves him from. Help is on the way! Yeah. Great scene.
His one weakness, pepper.
Yeah, right. Moving on, we actually have a repeat here, which we mentioned in our first bonus episode, favorite 90s romantic moments. And this is from Home Improvement. It was the best of Tim's, the worst of Tim's. And of course, we're talking about none other than that bedroom scene where Tim Allen is trying to make amends with his wife after, being kind of a gross, uncaring husband, but being charming around all the other ladies during the baby shower. And he makes up for it by ripping off his like car mechanic suit and revealing his tuxedo, and then turning off the lights and then quickly doing an impression. Bond, James Bond. Yeah, it's very cool.
And we have like 3 references that are pretty quick. One was Full House. It was on the episode A House Divided, where the previous homeowner comes over to visit, and his name was Bond. Lou Bond.
Forgive me, the name is Bond. Lou Bond.
And eventually he goes into the upstairs room where Uncle Jesse and Aunt Becky were staying, and he looks in oh look, there they are, my initials still carved into the beam.
Oh look, they're still there. The initials I carved in the beam. B.L.B.
There's the movie True Lies with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jamie Lee Curtis, which also borrows a lot from James Bond movies, particularly the beginning action sequence, because you've got Schwarzenegger in a tuxedo trying to schmooze his way by smoothing things with the ladies and using his charm to get to the villain's secret room and download data, and then it ends in this big ski chase, which are all things you've seen in a James Bond movie. Tim Allen makes another appearance with the movie The Santa Claus. This is the scene when he's in the North Pole and Judy the elf brings him some hot chocolate or hot cocoa, and Tim Allen references how good the drink was, and she reveals her recipe, her steps, which was not too hot, extra chocolate, shaken but not stirred.
Apparently that applies to more than martinis.
That's right. And we're actually going to see this show quite a few times on this list. The Simpsons. I think this is the first James Bond reference The Simpsons made, and this was on the TV show or the episode, and Maggie Makes 3.
Ooh, that's one of my favorite episodes, and also my girlfriend's favorite episode.
Do you know what the reference is, Brett?
I don't remember. I'm really embarrassed, but I don't remember.
No, it's the couch scene at the very beginning during the
credits. Right. Yeah.
Homer does the gun barrel.
Yep. I remember that. Okay. It's coming back to me. I thought it was like within the episode. I'm like,
oh no, we'll get to that later. Then there is Ace Ventura: When Nature Calls, which was it's not exactly a James Bond reference, but it is. Because the scene when he is just before he gets into the Rhino, which anybody who's seen this movie knows that scene.
Right.
It's the part where he's a master of disguise and he's eating prey with the lions and bathing themselves with the monkeys, but they're playing the song Secret Agent Man. And that song is not a 90s song. It's been around since the 70s, I believe, maybe 60s. I'm pretty sure it's 70s. But it was meant to be a James Bond-esque theme. It was going to be a TV theme for a James Bond themed show, and the show never got done. So then it just became its own song. And this was the first place where I heard this song. So it's still wrapped up in 90s pop culture for me.
It's very catchy too.
Oh,
if you haven't listened to it, listeners, check it out.
And it is now, at this point, up to this point in Bond history, everything we have just referenced has been during the hiatus of James Bond. There has been no movie, but every single one of these references have been thrown at our faces. And they've been relatively under the radar for most of us because they're referencing something. I don't know what it is. And then Goldeneye, the movie, dropped in November of 95. And then the references kicked it up to 11. Because Goldeneye was a huge hit. Just the movie itself. We'll get to you know what here in a little while. But the movie was a huge success and was it really revived the franchise in a big way, which is exactly what it needed. And of course, whenever you have big movies, you're going to have tie-ins with other advertisers, in which case Mountain Dew was one of the big advertisers when the movie came out. And if anybody remembers, their big catchphrase in the 90s was "Do the do." And there was a commercial where they had extreme sports athletes. I don't know his name, but they had a guy he would jump out of a plane in a tuxedo, get onto a bicycle in his tuxedo, and would start doing, and he was a BMX athlete, and would do flips and kicks and all this stuff with this bicycle. And then three guys were off in the corner going, "Oh, whoa." And the whole time this is going on, they're playing the James Bond theme song. And then three Mountain Dews would shoot out of the soda machine, and then they would catch them, and one of them would go, "Shaken, not stirred."
I don't think I would want stirred soda. It doesn't sound that refreshing.
This one I know very little about. I actually had to ask my boss about, because she's a Star Trek fan. But in the spinoff series Star Trek Deep Space Nine, there was an episode called Our Man Bashir. And in this, when James Bond became huge, there was a bunch of spinoff movies where people, well, not spinoff, but knockoff movies. One of them was movies featuring a character called Flint, and his big movie was called Our Man Flint. So this movie, or this episode of Deep Space Nine, really borrows from that, but they're still doing James Bond, where there is a book series. I don't remember what they were called, but they were James Bond. It was a James Bond character, and then they went into the hologram material, or the holosuite, and everybody on deck ended up getting in a tuxedo and was trying to solve this spy thriller on the ship.
Very cool.
My wife Megan told me this one on the show Friends in '96. This is the episode, the one where Rachel and Ross, Tom Selleck was a recurring character for a while, and I believe one of them referred to him as, "Hey, look, it's James Bond." And Phoebe had said that, And Tom Selleck was actually up to play the part of James Bond at one point, almost got the part, but he didn't.
Oh,
so there's
interesting.
there is a movie. Here's one of your references that I was talking about earlier with some of the dumb sidekicks. Spy Hard. This is a Leslie Nielsen parody movie, which had a lot of pop culture references from Jurassic Park and James Bond, In the Line of Fire, Speed, Sister Act. They threw it all in this movie.
Wow.
And Weird Al did the opening credits song, and it was done in the style of Thunderball. And they did a parody of the M briefing scene. Instead of being 007, Leslie Nielsen was Agent WD-40. And
at least he gets rid of the squeaks.
Yes. And the Moneypenny character was called Mischievous.
Mischievous. Is the director available?
No, he's married.
Oh, you kidding? Mischievous, you wouldn't be trying to make things hard for me?
Oh, Dick, if only I could. But you and I would work so well together deep undercover.
You know the agency's rules about secrecy. They're very rigid.
Yes, and we wouldn't want to blow it, would we?
Why don't you two just get a motel room? I need you in here now, Steele.
The TV show Boy Meets World, there was an episode where Eric was trying to think of something to do. He had to go get out and get a job. He was just sitting on being a couch potato. And then he had an idea for a TV show, and it was called Good Looking Guy. And he was going to be the good looking guy, which was a spy in a tuxedo, and he would fight crime.
Mom, Dad, I did what you said. I got a job.
Oh, Eric, we're proud of you.
Hey, what kind of job did you get? Check it out.
When a crime breaks out, all the cute girls shout, get the good-looking guy, good-looking guy. When there's a crime out there, he's gonna comb his hair, 'cause he's the good-looking guy. When a crime breaks out, all the cute girls shout, get the good-looking guy.
Eric! Mommy?
And even had his own theme song that he would say. And it was, when the danger is out, all the cute girls shout, it's the good-looking guy.
Good one.
There is an entire animated segment of Animaniacs. The second James Bond movie was called From Russia with Love. And this episode of Animaniacs was called From Burbank with Love, which Burbank, I think, is where they made a lot of their episodes.
Yeah, in California, that's where WB is.
And this was a huge James Bond parody. They had James Bond, they had the James Bond car, and they would torment him like they do everybody who's ever on the series.
Yeah.
Simpsons, there was a movie called You Only Live Twice. So this episode of The Simpsons was called You Only Live Once. And there's quite a few references in this one. So
oh yeah.
What do you know about this one?
2 words. Hank Scorpio. He's like one of the coolest villains you'll ever meet. He's very friendly, approachable. He has a flamethrower and he loves hammocks. And there's a pretty epic battle that goes on in his like secret lair while Homer's just kind of putzing around trying to figure out what to do with himself before his family goes back to Springfield. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but if you want to check that episode out, it's from season 8. It's one of the best.
Yeah, the scene where the James Bond character is strapped to a table and there's a laser coming up to him, that's straight out of Goldfinger. That big battle that you were talking about, that is a huge big battle that took place at the end of You Only Live Twice, where it's inside of a volcano, a hollowed out volcano. And even one of the girls, there's 2 references to that one. She is dressed like Honey Rider from Dr. No. She's got the same bikini outfit, but her character's name was like Miss Good Thighs, which was the name of a Bond girl on the Casino Royale parody in the 70s. But also in Goldeneye, the main villainess killed people by strangling with her thighs. So there's quite a few references in that one. And then we have All That.
Yeah, we got a few references and all that, actually. I mean, you can definitely elaborate on what I'm going to talk about, but the main one that stands out for me is Jimmy Bond, played by Josh Server. And I think it's pretty much just like a recurring sketch where he like sees, the agent that's helping him with the gadgets, usually played by Kel Mitchell, talking about what he's going to do and the mission debriefing. And then he goes to see the villain and tries to stop them. And the villains are usually, for lack of a better term, incompetent morons. I mean, we got Coldfinger, which is my personal favorite, played by Kenan Thompson. And he's basically just sitting in his giant refrigerator lair with his, iced finger and a penguin stuffed underneath his arm. He's like, look at it. It's really cold. Can you see that? Yeah. Look at that. It's cold. Just repeating that over and over and over again while James Bond's like trying to get through to him and saying, I'm going to stop you. And Lisa Reyes, I think, shows up as a Bond girl briefly in one of the earlier season ones. And then he later returns in another episode that I remember where the Spice Girls was musical guest. Immature was for the previous one, by the way. And Goldfinger has like another like villain to help him essentially conquer the world, named Hot Toe, played by Christine Knowings. This was around like season 4 at the time. It was like 97. And essentially what they would do is like make the world explode by touching Kenan Thompson's cold finger with Christine Knowings' hot toe, because who knows what would happen if they touched. It's like dividing by 0. The universe might implode. I don't know. But it turns out, they just turned Jimmy Bond into a pig. Okay. it was weird, but also quite satisfying to watch if you know like what you're getting into with the parody.
And also one of the biggest criticisms, especially of James Bond in the 90s, was how sexist he was towards women. So there's a bit of a dig the fact that they made Jimmy Bond a pig. and yes, at this point we had seen Hot Toe and Coldfinger, and Kel was the quartermaster, but instead of being Q, it was W, which I thought was fun. Sabrina the Teenage Witch had a Bond reference. It was the episode Cat Showdown, and there was one of those cat prissy contest things showcasing the cat. I don't know what they're called, cat show, but one of the contestants was Blofeld.
Oh wow!
Bald head, scar on his cheek, and he brought that white cat and was happy to show her off for the competition. The Simpsons makes another appearance. This was the episode Spin-Off Showcase, and this one didn't have as many references as the last one. It mostly just borrowed a lot from the movie Live and Let Die. Mm-hmm. This was one of the episodes where there was 3 little mini episodes, and the sheriff had his own spin-off show, and there was a lot of the Live and Let Die references in this one.
Cool.
Dexter's Laboratory, the photo finish episode. One of the things that, again, going back to the Simpsons episode where the laser is going up towards James Bond's crotch, James Bond hollers at Goldfinger, "Oh, you expect me to talk?" And Goldfinger, "No, I expect you to die." And in the episode of photo finish, Dexter, if I'm not mistaken, since it's been such a long time, he's trying to get film from the photo development place that he didn't want to be developed.
Yeah.
And they
because
ended up...
Dee Dee took pictures of his lab and he didn't want anyone seeing a secret lab.
That's right. And they strapped him, the developer strapped him to the table, and he's got I think one eye.
Yeah, it's like a giant popping red eye, and he's got like one of those old-fashioned shutter squeezing things to like take the picture, and it kills people when he takes their picture.
Yes. And of course they did that reference. "Oh, do you expect me to talk? No, Agent Dexter. I expect you to smile."
Welcome to my studio. It's time for your portrait, Agent Dexter. My personal camera emits a special photon beam, which on contact will destabilize and reassemble your particles, which leaves you immortalized in a lovely 8x10 glossy. It's a really lovely photo which captures your very essence, actually.
Do you expect me to talk?
No, Agent Dexter. I expect you to smile.
Yeah, I really love this episode. I love Dexter's Lab, and hopefully at some point we'll delve into 90s Cartoon Network territory, because that's besides 90s Nickelodeon, that's like where I have a lot of expertise on and just a lot to cover. But actually, before we move on to another reference, I just want to make a quick nod to Adventures of Pete and Pete, actually, because the photo booth that they hide their secret, laboratory and rocket launcher for this Bond villain underneath the photo booth actually reminds me a lot of the same photo booth from the special What We Did on Our Summer Vacation. So it's got a couple of tie-ins in there.
And it is at this point in Bond history when the video game, Nintendo 64 video game Goldeneye came out, which if anybody grew up in the 90s and played Nintendo, you know this game. And we'll talk about more of that in a little while.
Yeah, we have a whole separate section for that.
Because that game was awesome. But we are coming near the end. We're in 1997 now. There was a movie starring Bill Murray that was called The Man Who Knew Too Little. And that title is actually a parody of Alfred Hitchcock's movie, The Man Who Knew Too Much. But a lot of the advertising for the movie, the posters, were very, very much like parodies of James Bond posters in the 60s. Even some of the theming, the atmosphere of the movie was very much 60s James Bond. But
nice.
No direct reference, just theming. And then we have Austin Powers.
Another one of my favorites. Yeah, baby. Yeah.
Yeah, baby.
Oh, and those gross teeth.
The first, well, all three, but this was where the first one came out, International Man of Mystery. And this was the first time James Bond really had huge digs at the franchise. They made fun of Bond himself and Blofeld with Dr. Evil, the hairless cat in his lab, the way
Mr. Bigglesworth.
Yes, the way he would execute his henchmen, the car, the ridiculous henchmen, the ridiculous play on names. James Bond's women always had playful names. You had Pussy Galore. You had Holly Goodhead. No, I'm not making it up. Xenia Onatop. So for Austin Powers, you had names like A Lot of Vagina.
Ivana Humpamore.
Ivana Hump a lot. Yes.
Yeah.
So and there were all kinds of ridiculous things like that. All that had another one with Jimmy Bond, and except this time instead of Coldfinger and Hot Toe, it was the villain Dr. Maybe.
Oh, go figure. I said that before as a joke. I had no idea it was an actual villain.
Yes. And that was by Mark Saul, who played that one.
Mm-hmm.
98, Disney's Recess. There was an episode called Parents' Night, and the parents ended up all being secret agents. And one of their code names was 006. And 006 happened to be the villain of the movie Goldeneye. I really hate this one. I
mean, you can just skip it.
No. It's still there. And it's worth mentioning. But I really hate this one because I don't like the Spice Girls. I don't like them. But there's still a James Bond reference here. And it was in the movie Spice World. And they got Roger Moore, who was James Bond, to play a parody of Blofeld in this movie.
Wow, full circle.
Holding the white cat. And then at one point has somebody brings him a drink and they said that it was shaken, not stirred. And he was like, oh, yes, perfect. Just the way I like it. I was like, oh, God.
Insert obligatory girl power slogan here.
Oh, God. I think it just died a little bit. My wife loves Spice Girls. I don't.
I was going to say this is for like the 3 to 5 fans who like Spice Girls to listen to us.
And then The Simpsons. I think this is the last Simpsons reference. This was the episode called Girly Edition, in which Lisa was in charge of being a news anchor for the news, local news, and Bart sat in one of the anchor chairs and spun around in it and says, "So we meet again, Mr. Bond." And then at one point, I think within the same scene, Lisa keeps talking to him and he tells him, "Shut up, Octopussy," which also is a James Bond movie. in '98, we had the video game Metal Gear Solid, which also was a huge impact on video games. And
yeah, it was a pioneer of the stealth genre with Solid Snake going on secret missions.
yes, and there are more James Bond references in 2, a lot more in 3, but they were in the 2000s. In the first game, well, technically this would be the third game because there was a Metal Gear Solid for the Nintendo and a Metal Gear 2 for the Nintendo.
Oh yeah.
But this one, if you beat the game on its good setting, if I remember right, you get the good ending. When you played it again, you got to play in a tuxedo.
Very fitting.
There is one more Simpsons reference. I promise we're coming near the end here. This was Treehouse of Horror 9. And there was a character, I don't know this episode that well, but I do know that there was one character where somebody had told this character, if your fly wasn't undone, you'd look like Roger Moore. And later at the end of the episode, they found an autographed picture of Sean Connery, but it was signed, Best Wishes, Roger Moore.
Oh, wow. I bet that would fetch a pretty penny on eBay.
This might be my favorite reference, actually. This goes back to On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Mhm.
And this was in the TV show Batman Beyond. In the movie Secret Service, and I had made this earlier, that it ends on a downer. James Bond gets married in this movie, and as he's in the car about to go on his honeymoon, the villain does a drive-by and shoots at the car and kills his wife. And the movie ends with him crying over his wife. And the recurring lines that he would have with her in the movie is, "We have all the time in the world." And then, of course, it ends with him holding her in his arms saying, "We have all the time in the world." Batman Beyond, it was the episode called Dead Man's Hand, in which you had the Royal Flush Gang. George Lazenby, who played James Bond in Secret Service, was the voice of the King character. And at one point says, "We have all the time in the world."
Ooh, clever reference. That's was that the second or the third Batman James Bond tie-in we have here?
I think it's the second. No, third.
Wow. Crossing over, man. Yep.
This was Notting Hill. Another one I don't like because I don't care for Julia Roberts. But there was a character who was in the driver's seat. He was getting all his friends over to go get Julia Roberts. He was trying to get I forgot his name, but the main actor to Julia Roberts in time, and he said James Bond didn't have to deal with this sort of shit, which I thought was great. Then we had the sequel to Austin Powers, which was The Spy Who Shagged Me, in which you get Mini Me, which is great. This one's my favorite one.
Vern Troyer.
And 2 references left. And Brett, do you wish to speak about Angry Beavers?
Yeah, I mean, I love that show. That's probably like the last great Nicktoon I tuned into before I fell off the bandwagon. And there's a couple of times it's mentioned briefly. One time is at the end of Muscular Beaver from season 1, where Dag quits being a superhero for a little bit, and then he just shifts to his alter ego as Devil Beaver. And he like dons a tux from, his superhero outfit, rips that off, jumps in like this little radio flyer wagon that transforms into like a convertible and just rides off and ends the episode with like the gun barrel kind of going down. It's awesome. I wish it lasted longer, like it's a whole episode. And then we get a little longer taste of it where we go to the episode in season 3 called Pass It On, where all the beavers and woodland creature friends are sitting around a campfire, like telling stories and having like different characters finish the story. And the running thing that starts with Norbert's story is Double O Beaver, but this time Norbert's dressed like James Bond, and Tree Flower is dressed as like his Bond girl, and they just go through a lot of hijinks as Dr. Beaver, played by Daggett, tries to foil their plans, and it gets very ridiculous as every different rendition like twists and warps the story to complete absurdity. So both are definitely worth checking out.
And our last James Bond reference within the 90s that I know of, holy cow, that's a long list. This was in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. This one was the second Halloween episode, I think. In the previous Halloween episode, there was a spell that took place that you became whatever it was you were dressed as for Halloween. So Xander, one of the supporting characters, he was in camo garb and ended up becoming a drill sergeant or some kind of military person. Willow was dressed as a ghost, so she became a literal ghost. So with this in mind, Xander, for the next Halloween episode called Fear Itself, he's going to do the same thing. I'm going to dress as the most awesome character that I can think of in case we turn into our characters. And he wore a tuxedo. And then they started asking him, what are you? Are you a waiter? No, I'm James Bond. What's the matter with you?
Yeah, I'm with you there. Demoted to a waiter? How unfitting, especially if he was like serving a martini to people. Oh my goodness.
It did really end up backfiring on him because this episode was preying on the thing that you were the most afraid of. And in a way, he did become James Bond, because James Bond is supposed to be this incredible spy who you'd never see coming. And when their fears started personifying, nobody noticed him. Because he was, to them, he was invisible. So in a way, he was spy-ish because he was never noticed.
I guess it worked out better than you thought.
Oh, yeah. And that is all of the James Bond references within pop culture. And the last big one that we have is the Goldeneye video game. And I will pass this off to Brett.
Sure. So surprisingly, you never played this growing up, did you? Or did you?
Me? Oh, shoot, I played the fire out of this thing.
Okay. Well, I'll talk about as much as I can, and you can jump in if you want to fill in details.
Go for it. I have 007 status on all of the saved games on my 64.
Gotcha. Very cool. Well, I wasn't as good as Alex at playing GoldenEye. I just kind of got roped into it during sleepovers, parties, and other social gatherings. So just to give you a few facts about GoldenEye, the N64 video game, it released just before the Tomorrow Never Dies film on August 25th, 1997. And despite low expectations, it actually sold 8 million copies, making it the third highest selling N64 game ever, which is right behind Super Mario 64 and Mario Kart 64. Very impressive for a non-Nintendo franchise game.
Yes.
It was also considered an important video game in the industry history, basically because it made first-person shooter a mainstream viable genre outside of arcades or arcade cabinets at movie theaters. It also had the trademark deathmatch in multiplayer, which was a huge hit and selling point for the game.
Yeah.
Because you can line up up to 4 different tiny screens on your tube TV and just find a level map, unlock figure out all the secrets and play essentially tag or look for different things and be the last man standing with all your arsenal of weapons. Is strangely addicting for Bond fans and newcomers alike. I mean, it was a fun game. I wasn't very good at it, but I know people tried very hard to get the golden gun, and I'd often stick to cheap shot tactics throw grenades, throwing knives, hide behind corners, that sort of thing, or sniper rifle. I was more like the behind the scenes player versus the aggressive up in your face type player.
Being odd job.
Yeah, pretty much. I'm more privy to adventure platformer JRPGs and kart racers than first person shooters, but even knowing that, I still had fun playing it with other people.
Oh yeah.
I just remember my kill screen just constantly being flooded with Fred, and I'm like, yep, I'm that guy.
Whew, all right.
Yeah.
Sit back now, sip on your martinis. We've gone through our mission is complete. That was a hefty list.
Yeah, I hope you're still here with us.
I hope so too. It was really interesting because I had taken this list over to a closed James Bond group on Facebook and gave them this list and said, "Can you guys think of anything else?" And everyone went, "I had no idea there were this many references in pop culture in the '90s," which was really fun.
Good job, Alex.
Yes, I was really proud of myself. But it's still being referenced today. There are still movies and TV shows. My son, little Toot Jensen, he watches Bubble Guppies. There's a James Bond reference in Bubble Guppies, of all things. Wow. The franchise has survived 60 years, and this October it turns 60. The last James Bond movie had just won an Oscar for Best Song. It's won several BAFTAs, which is like the British Oscars. It's won Best Foreign Film over in Japan. It's still going as strong as it ever has. So if you've thought about checking James Bond movies out, give them a shot. If you want to know which ones to try first, give me a shout, because hopefully I'll steer you in the right direction.
I'll visit you after the show, Alex, so I can get a list, because I'm kind of in a casual noob territory of James Bond.
But before we go, and this game is usually pretty quick, we'll do a quick version of this or that.
This or that, this or that, time to play this or that.
All right, so I am going to, these are all GoldenEye 64 references. So, Brett, which level, the facility or the complex level?
I'd have to go with facility because I'm more familiar with it. Like, this was the map that my friends played with me the most often, and I often found that there was a lot of secrets hiding in there, around every corner. A lot of trap doors, stairwells, like corners you could hide behind. It looked pretty bland as a level, but I mean, it was great to play around, and I guess at the end of the day, that's what matters most.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I picked the facility as well. That was probably the most iconic level because everybody played that level.
Oh, yeah.
I love that drop down floor, and on that top floor, you could look down and shoot at the villain, at your co.
That's where I'd often die because I didn't realize people were shooting from there.
Next one, bare hands or slaps, or the golden gun.
I'm gonna go with bare hands just because I never had the patience or the drive to get the golden gun, and I feel like in a desperation move, I would just go like, "Get out of here!" if I had to.
I agree with you. I also go with bare hands. I did not like using the golden gun because you only got one shot, and it took forever for it to reload. So if you missed, you were open territory for a while. They could get you.
Yeah.
Especially if they had a semi-automatic weapon. And slaps, you never knew who it was going to go. It was very much a ticking time bomb.
Yeah, I'm sure you could easily add some silly clown music to it and just make a compilation video of people slapping each other for an entire match.
Question 3, multiplayer or single player?
I'm going to say multiplayer just because I never got far in the single player. Like, I only rented the game from Blockbuster at the time. I had an N64, but I had to work really hard to earn that with my own chore money. And I only got a couple of games at the time, which was like Banjo-Kazooie, Super Mario 64, and Pokemon Stadium. So I didn't actually have a chance to like play in depth in between school and everything else. But I certainly had time to drop like 10, 20, 30 minutes with a group of friends to play multiplayer. So I got to go with that.
I go single player. I loved multiplayer, but unfortunately I got too darn good at the game and I didn't know how to gauge my level. So I came off super OP when I was playing with other people and it got to the point where they didn't want to play with me. So I just stuck with single player. And like I said earlier, I had beat them all on the hardest difficulty so that I got 007 status and then made it all ridiculously easy.
I'm not going over your house for a sleepover. I'll get my ass kicked yet again.
Yeah, my wife refuses to play.
I'll just watch.
We'll have to play Nightfire or Nightfire. You can actually work together on that one.
Okay, cool.
Question 4: proximity mines or throwing knives?
Well, as mentioned before, this was one of my tactics, so I'm just going to go with throwing knives. I love throwing them. Maybe I'm part ninja.
And I go with proximity mines. I really got a kick out of getting myself into some corner and putting the proximity mines right at the entrance of the corner, so that way I was far enough away and they thought that they could get to me.
That requires a lot of patience and stealth. I can never quite set those off just right. I'd often they would often explode as I was setting them, so I'm like, nope, too hard, too much pressure. I'm gonna stick with something simple.
That tactic was teetering on camping, but
I
didn't have guns. I had proximity mine. And final question: character choice, a hero or a villain?
I'm gonna go with hero. I like playing the good guy in video games, as long as I'm good at playing them.
And I agree. If it's a James Bond game, I've got to be James Bond.
Yeah. Although I'm a sucker for villains in general because they have such interesting character designs and backstories. So maybe not for James Bond, but maybe for something else like Are You Afraid of the Dark, I'd choose villain.
All right. Well, we are done with our this or that. Brett, would you like to wrap it up for us?
Actually, you should wrap it up because this is your episode.
Oh, well, then I shall wrap it up. So thank you to all of your Slimesters and Gackoids for supporting our Patreon. Thank you so much for listening to this bonus episode and listening to my extremely long rambling. How does the James Bond films connect with you? Are there any particular memories from the 80s or 90s, especially centered around James Bond, that are worth sharing? Let us know. You can email us at splatattack2021@gmail.com, or you can send us a message on Instagram, which happens to be Splat Attack Podcast, to have your questions featured on our Moana's mailbag, or Moana featured on our Mona's mailbag.
Moana is not 90s Nick.
No, she's not.
2010s Disney. Get out of here.
What is that? We don't want that here. We don't serve your kind here. Or if you just want to chat with us in general and talk about your favorite 90s, not 2010s moments, we'll be happy to do that too. Actually, we'll be happy to talk with you about your 2010 moments too. It is now time to send our tuxes to the dry cleaners, put the playing cards away, holster our Walther PPA. Thank you all so much for tuning into this very, very spy culture episode.
Thank you very much.
A special thank you to all of our current patrons, Monica, Kyle, Marley, Kat, and Aaron, for helping make our exclusive content possible. If you Slimesters and Gackoids want to get in on the bonus content we have, become a patron today over at patreon.com/splatattack. Or if you're already a patron, please tell a friend or two why Splat Attack is worth their time. Help us preserve the slime-filled past and keep our podcast running by buying a shirt or a mug over at our bonfire, which is bonfire.com/store/Splat Attack store. Monica ended up getting one for her dog, which was super adorable. We have shirts of all sizes and styles that can leave you looking nostalgic among your retro-rific fans. We also have a pretty snazzy mug with our logo on it too. So, and I just ordered one for myself. So
me too. So we're going to look podcast official in the next episode.
Additionally, if you have a spare moment or two, rate us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, wherever you can find the ability to leave us a review and a rating. It really does help us out getting others to find us. It puts us on their algorithm so they can find us.
You know, all you 90s Nick fans are out there. You just got to find us. So this is the best way to do it, through ratings and reviews. Even if you have something that you don't like about us, that's fine too. Whatever's on your mind, as long as you're listening to the podcast, chime in, leave some ratings. Only takes like a minute or two.
And we're happy with constructive criticism. Really, we are very what's the word I'm looking for? We're always criticizing each other's work, and it's usually in the positive way. It's not, that's terrible. It's the, hey, let's do this. So please, we take constructive criticism seriously. Let us know if it's something you'd like us to do differently, you want to see more of. We want to hear from you guys. As for now, tune in next month on our Patreon page when we trade in our tux for a cape and spandex and enter the superhero arena to rank all 5 of the Muscular Beaver saga from Angry Beavers. Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah, Daggett does that a lot. I'm super stoked for this. Like, this is you love the James Bond topic. I love the Muscular Beaver topic because for some reason Angry Beavers just tickles me in all the right places for like enjoyment. So look forward to that. And we're going to review all 5 episodes that are featured across the Angry Beaver series, because this was a topic that was mentioned by Instagram user whose name we forgot. So we're sorry about that, because this was like 8 months ago when we first started. But that just goes to show that we listen to you, Slimesters and Gackoids. We may not be able to fit your topics in immediately, but we definitely try to find space in our schedule. So it's going to show up here next month on Patreon. All right, Slimesters and Gackoids, thank you for joining us today. Let's drain the slime tank and jetpack out of our secret headquarters.
Aye, aye, co-captain. Whatever you do, don't push the red button.
Like this? You idiot! That's the history erase button! You know what's gonna happen!
The big, shiny button!
Splat you later! Woo, woo, woo. Time to get out of here before this place self-destructs.
Reprise the theme song and roll the credits.
Hard to believe, folks, but it's time to say goodbye.
Nighty-night.
Hey, check us out next time for more adventure and another great legend of the Hidden Temple.
What'll we do till then?
Chill for a couple. We'll be back.
You're on, Nick.
And it was time for the superhero to move on.
I declare this meeting of the Midnight Society closed.
Bye-bye.
Of course, I had to promise him that just so he'd keep thinking I was plain old, bumbling little Daggett. But that's only a cover for...
Double O Beaver, secret agent from the near future. Hello, Gold Beaver. Da-da.